Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm Ben Gia. I'm the president of Cogito. We're really glad to host Dr. Ross Inman, who's going to be so generous as to give a lecture to all of us tonight. Dr. Inman is an associate professor of philosophy at the Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. That's correct?
That's right, yeah.
And he's also the editor of Philosophia Christi, which I hope I've pronounced correctly. He's the author of a dozen articles and book chapters on a variety of topics related to theology, philosophy of religion, metaphysics, philosophy of mind. And he's also the author of two books, one of which, Christian Philosophy as a Way of Life, Cogito is reading this semester in one of our reading groups. With that, I'll give it to Dr. Inman.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sure he'll all wow us.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. And I just want to say it's a delight to be here. It's good to see you all. Thanks to Jarrett for the invitation to come down. We are in Wake Forest, North Carolina. It's just a quick trip over here, but first time on campus, so thank you so much. You've been very hospitable, and I'm looking forward to a discussion tonight. Okay, so section 1. So I'm going to be going through this lecture here. Your handout should be keyed to the sections and some key quotations you should have there on the handout as well. So section 1, philosophy's current public relations problem. In a public debate in 2015, Florida Senator Marco Rubio made the notable remark that, quote, "Welders make more money than philosophers. We need more welders and less philosophers," end of quote. This quip against philosophy captures a broad public sentiment about the utter irrelevance and impracticality of philosophy and philosophers for matters of ordinary human life. The life devoted to philosophical activity is commonly thought to be useless and out of touch with reality, impractical, and irrelevant to real human needs. I know this from personal experience, including countless conversations with family, friends, and strangers about my own vocation as a Christian philosopher. Many required college philosophy courses are, I'm afraid to say, downright boring and completely out of touch with questions of real human importance. Believe it or not, I actually dropped my first college philosophy class for precisely this reason, actually. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked with others who've had the exact same experience as my own. At best, many people, both Christian and non-Christian, academic and non-academic, are woefully underinformed about what philosophy is, let alone what philosophy is for. At worst, many people conceive of philosophers as rather cartoonish figures, fumbling about in their libraries in their wrinkled sport coats, looking as if they are not sure which way is up and which way is down. Some of these conceptions are well-deserved, if we're honest, while others are not. In fact, some of the professional philosophers I know are the most in-tune people with the world. And when the reclusive and rather socially awkward specimens we call philosophers do emerge from their cave of books to give a lecture on Plato's forms or Kant's categorical imperative, it becomes increasingly clear to many that these men and women are quickly becoming intellectual relics of a bygone age. Philosophers are masters of an ancient craft that has been far surpassed by more relevant disciplines, STEM disciplines in the sciences, technology, engineering, and math that lead to real discoveries about the world, discoveries that better the human condition and help us live well. And the reality is that this ignorance at best and cartoonish conception at worst of philosophy and philosophers is shared by far too many Christians as well. Herein lies philosophy's current public relations problem. Section 2, recovering philosophy as a way of life. But what if there's a different way to think about philosophy? A thicker, more ancient way of viewing philosophy as indispensable to the human life well lived? Well, indeed there is, and I'd like to do my small part here tonight to help reorient the way you think about philosophy whether you're a philosophical novice or a veteran. It may surprise you to learn that philosophy did not always have the public relations problem that it has today. There's a much older tradition in which philosophy was viewed as intimately tied to the everyday rhythms of one's life, as an all-encompassing life posture that enables us to see the world as it really is and to orient ourselves to it, all for the sake of living well. For both non-Christian and Christian Greek and Roman thinkers, such as Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, Seneca, Gregory of Nyssa, and Boethius, philosophical activity is not a momentary activity one happens to engage in every so often, like attending an occasional lecture or reading or thinking about a complex philosophical issue. Rather, for these thinkers and their disciples, the person whose life is devoted to the love and pursuit of wisdom and virtue of soul, the person who lives the philosophical kind of life, is more like the person whose life is marked by the activities of writing, playing, and practicing and teaching music, the person living a musical way of life, in contrast to the person who owns an instrument and happens to dust it off and play it every now and then. For them, philosophy is not a mere moment, but it's an entire way of life. For these ancient thinkers, the philosophical life is a pervasive way of being in the world, aimed at the transformation of the entire person, in tune with what is true and what is good and beautiful. According to two of the leading historians of philosophy who have written in this area, the French philosopher Pierre Hadot and the late American philosopher at Princeton, John Cooper, for the ancients, philosophy is not confined to the halls of the academy, but rather permeates and informs every aspect of an individual's life. As Cooper puts it, philosophy is the captain or steerman of one's whole life, and not some purely abstract intellectual exercise or game. Philosophy operates, as Pierre Hadot claims, quote, not as a theoretical construct, but as a principal method for training people to live and look at the world in a new way. It's an attempt to transform mankind, Hadot says. For ancient philosophers, both Christian and non-Christian, philosophy's chief aim is to help one structure one's life to properly see and orient oneself to the world, ultimately for the sake of living well. Philosophy, in the words of the Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca, quote, tells us how to live, not how to talk, end of quote. At the core of this classical conception of philosophy, both Christian and non-Christian, are two key ideas I'd like to discuss in our time together tonight. The first is, these are the two key ideas on your handout there. The first is the role of wonder in motivating and sustaining the philosophical life. And the second is the medicinal or therapeutic nature of philosophy as a life-giving remedy to heal the ailing human soul, making it apt, by way of spiritual exercises, to see and lay hold of what is truly good and beautiful in human life. I'll unpack each of these key ideas at the heart of the notion of philosophy in antiquity and attempt to show that the Judeo-Christian tradition has the unique metaphysical and moral resources to make both of them possible. Let's start with the first key idea that makes up this more classical conception of philosophy, and that is this: the role of wonder in motivating and sustaining the philosophical life. Let's call this the wonder-philosophy connection. Classically, the philosophical life is jump-started by ordinary and everyday experiences of wonder. Plato, in his dialogue Theaetetus, has Socrates put his finger on wonder as the fundamental drive underlying the love and the pursuit of wisdom. Quote, "For this is an experience which is characteristic of a philosopher, this wondering. This is where philosophy begins and nowhere else," end of quote. Subsequently, Aristotle, Plato's arguably best student, echoes his teacher on this in his Metaphysics when he says, quote, "For it is owing to their wonder that men both now begin and at first began to philosophize." End of quote. This sentiment, this wonder philosophy sentiment, is echoed by later Christian philosophers like Clement of Alexandria, St. Augustine, and others, including much later in the medieval period, St. Thomas Aquinas. But in order to see what philosophy has to do with wonder, we must first ask what it is to experience wonder in the first place. While wonder has in recent years been the subject of focused psychological research, a defining feature of wonder, and this is on your handout, involves our being aware of something or experience, such as the Grand Canyon, experiencing a beautiful work of art or music, some idea or concept, like the special theory of relativity or the doctrine of the Trinity, or so on, or some person, in this case, Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr., for example, that is beyond our ordinary frame of reference. When we are gripped by wonder, we are startled out of the ordinary and humdrum of human experience. I just encourage you to attend to the experiences of wonder that you yourself have had in your own life and try to capture what are these experiences of wonder psychologically. When we're gripped by wonder, we are startled out of the ordinary and humdrum of human experience. Wonder brings with it a kind of existential force that propels us beyond the confines of our small, narrow selves and into a much bigger and weightier orbit of reality, into the true depths of things. We often refer to experiences of wonder as mind-blowing, as they reveal that our current understanding of the world is simply too small or inadequate to truly depict what it is that we're experiencing. When we experience wonder, we realize that the house of our soul is much too small. It has far too few rooms to accommodate what we are encountering in experiences of wonder. What is needed is a soul renovation or remodel, the addition of mental rooms that would allow us to adequately take in what is truly real and worthy of reverence, awe, and careful attention. And when we make the appropriate soul space, the experience of wonder tends to be positive, enlightening, and even soul-satisfying. It's precisely these sorts of experiences that help us wade into the depths of the world around us. And it's here where the philosophical life begins, classically. Of all the creatures under the sun, human beings have a unique appetite for wonder. We are wonder-hungry, you might say. And interestingly enough, our best science reveals that regularly experiencing wonder is actually psychologically good for us, both individually and socially or collectively. Our deep wonder hunger is tied to the fact that we are, by nature, meaning-seeking animals. Humans have a natural appetite to make sense of things, ultimately for the sake of living well. And we strive to make sense not just of some part of reality in isolation from others, such as geography or economics. Rather, we naturally seek to make sense of the totality of things and how everything fits together for the purpose of living well. And this inbuilt desire to know and fit oneself into reality as a whole, to be at home in the world at large, is the very substance of the philosophical life, classically understood. Ultimately, we wonder and strive to make sense of it all precisely because we are human. Living philosophically is a deeply and uniquely human way of life. The second core idea at the heart of philosophy as a way of life in antiquity is what one author has called, namely Martha Nussbaum, the medical model of philosophizing. For ancient thinkers, philosophy is medicinal or therapeutic, as it serves to heal ailments of the soul and to guide its practitioners to more health-giving ways of being in the world. As Epicurus famously said, quote, I love these quotes, and this is on your handout, just as there is no profit in medicine if it does not expel the diseases of the body, so there is no profit in philosophy either, if it does not expel the suffering of the mind, end of quote. And later, the Stoic philosopher Seneca remarked, quote, if you are studying philosophy, it is well, for this is just what being well means. Without philosophy, the mind is sickly, and the body too, though it may be very powerful, is strong only as that of a madman or a lunatic is strong. At the root of this therapeutic model of philosophy is what Pierre Hadot refers to as spiritual exercises, as health-giving means by which ailments of the soul are remedied and the soul is made fit to see what is true, love what is good, and to live accordingly. In general, the spiritual exercises were viewed by the ancients as a way to train and sculpt the soul, a practice they referred to as ascesis, similar to how physical exercises were viewed as a way to train and sculpt the physical body. Hadot remarks that, quote, just as by dint of repeated physical exercises, athletes give new form and strength to their bodies, so the philosopher develops his strength of soul, modifies his inner climate, transforms his vision of the world, and finally his entire being, end of quote. This therapeutic training or ascesis of the soul to make it healthy enough to see the true and to love the good involve both individual spiritual exercises such as meditation, therapy of the passions or self-mastery, attention, self-examination, research, thorough investigation, listening, and memorization, as well as communal spiritual exercises such as friendship and Socratic dialogue. This view of the philosophical life as a medicinal way of life with spiritual exercises at its core was adopted by Christian philosophers and theologians in antiquity, including the likes of Clement of Alexandria, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory of Nazianzus, St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, Maximus the Confessor, and Boethius. Philosophy is, as one early Christian thinker put it, this is Gregory of Nyssa, he says, quote, philosophy is that medicine of the soul from which we learn the remedy for every weakness that can touch the soul, end of quote. Yet ancient Christian thinkers did not uncritically appropriate this medical model of philosophizing wholesale from their non-Christian counterparts. Rather, they transposed the medical model of philosophizing and the spiritual exercises into the higher key of a Christian vision of reality, the good life, and the adequate means of achieving the good life. Christian philosophers practiced the spiritual exercises in a distinctively Christian manner, in that, as Hadot claims, they always, quote, they always presupposed the assistance of God's grace, and they made humility the most important of the virtues, end of quote. The spiritual exercises that were thought to make practitioners fit to properly see and orient themselves to reality were grace-empowered and grace-sustained. As we will see below, they thought that apart from God's empowering and transformative grace, there could be no deep and lasting transformation of the human mind and the human passions. Pure human grit and self-mastery were utterly insufficient to transform the self on the Christian story. Section 3, on Christian philosophy as a way of life. Let's now consider how the Judeo-Christian tradition can be thought to contribute the requisite metaphysical and moral resources to help make possible these two key ideas at the heart of philosophy as a way of life in antiquity. So how might Christianity in particular provide the unique resources to make both of these key ideas possible? Okay. Regarding the role of wonder in a philosophical way of life in antiquity, I want to point out three Christian theological insights that I think make the wonder-filled philosophical life possible in the first place. The first is theological anthropology. The second is the nature of creation as communicative of the divine itself. And lastly, the close fit between human cognitive abilities and our appetite to wonder and make sense of the world. These should be on your handout. Without the metaphysical and moral framework of the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's difficult to see how the wonder-filled philosophical life would be possible in the first place. Let's unpack each of these claims in turn. We've already seen that psychological science suggests that wonder is actually good for us, both individually and collectively, socially. But for the Christian, is this really all that surprising? I think not. There is a deeper metaphysical, even theological reason for thinking that we were made to wonder and to make sense of the world, to philosophize, which leads to the first insight from anthropology that makes the wonder-filled philosophical life possible. And here it is. We were made for God. And God, of course, is vast beyond measure, not quantitatively, that is size-wise, we might say, but qualitatively, in the sense that the infinite fullness of God's life is beyond our ordinary level of experience or frame of reference. You were made then, as a key is tailor-made for a lock, to forever know and love and enjoy a being who is immeasurably vast beyond full human comprehension. And this deep truth about God is precisely why there will always be aspects of our ongoing knowledge and experience of God, I think both in this life and in the life to come, that will require constant mental accommodation on our behalf. New things we learn and experience in our continued life with God that we will need to make room for within the narrow halls of our small minds. By God's own design, we will be eternally awestruck by the vastness, the splendor, and the beauty of the triune God and the wonderful works of his hands. Precisely because we were made for God, we were made for wonder. And because of the close connection between wonder and philosophy, classically, that is, wonder is the beginning, the middle, and the end of the philosophical life, classically, we might even dare say that we were made to live the philosophical life, to seek to make meaningful sense of it all, and to orient our lives accordingly. And this leads to the second Christian theological insight that makes the wonder-filled philosophical life possible. This is the point about creation itself and the nature of creation. Creation itself is the proper object of wonder precisely because every facet of it communicates and reflects the marvelous truth, goodness, and beauty of its triune creator. A robust, even sacramental doctrine of creation provides a fitting theological basis for a posture of philosophical wonder. Since all creaturely reality originates in, is sustained by, and finds its proper end in the triune God, creation itself communicates the wonder-filled depths of God. Creation is, as John Calvin so aptly put it, the theater of God's wondrous glory, and we all have a front row seat. The third and final Christian theological insight that makes the wonder-filled philosophical life possible is that we were made with the unique ability to experience the wonder of creation. Not only is creation itself, from the ordinary to the extraordinary, suffused with the awe-inspiring radiance of the triune God, but we were created with the specific intellectual equipment to reliably discern this radiance. There is, you might say, a natural fit between our intellectual capacity to wonder, as well as our appetite for wonder, and the remarkable fact that reality itself is, in all of its various dimensions, truly wonderful. As a key is made specifically for a lock, we were specifically made to apprehend the awe-inducing contours of reality. In the end, our being pre-primed to crave and experience wonder within a world that is truly full of wonders to behold is neither the product of mindless material atoms in motion, as it is on Epicureanism, nor is it the product of the impersonal rational force or logos that orders nature, as it is on Stoicism, or even the purely unguided evolutionary processes, as, say, on contemporary evolutionary naturalism. By personal and intentional design, we were tailor-made to experience wonder. In this way, one might even argue that only the Judeo-Christian tradition has the metaphysical resources to explain how the wonder-filled philosophical life is possible in the first place. Let me encourage you to pause and think about this remarkable truth for a moment. On a Christian philosophical way of life, God has set the stage for each of us to experience a life of soul-satisfying wonder. He has done this by purposefully creating us with the unique capacity to know and be enthralled by His vastness, by giving us a front row seat in the theater of His radiant glory, and by endowing us with the specific intellectual equipment to lovingly behold it all in wonder. Let's conclude here by turning to how the Judeo-Christian tradition provides the metaphysical and moral resources to make sense of the philosophical way of life as a health-giving means of deep and abiding personal transformation. On rival Greek and Roman views of eudaimonia, or the good life, espoused by the likes of Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Epicurus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and others, the self is to be sculpted by way of spiritual exercise, discipline, and self-control, all by drawing on natural human abilities alone. The tall task of self-mastery, of subduing unruly passions by way of pure human grit and self-control, is one shared in common by all non-Christian philosophical ways of life in antiquity. But as the Apostle Paul insightfully recognized on the basis of his own personal experience with self-mastery, all attempts to transform the self by relying on natural human abilities alone, what he elsewhere calls the flesh, have, quote, indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgences of the flesh, end of quote. That's Colossians 2:20 and 23. Paul's own firsthand experience made clear that self-mastery over his unruly passions was a non-starter, given the powerful dynamics of sin operating on the human will. He writes, quote, you're familiar with this text, it's a powerful one in this context, quote, "For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Who will deliver me from this body of death?" He says, "Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord." That's from Romans chapter 7. With pristine moral clarity and insight, Paul recognized the explosive and enslaving dynamics of sin that hinders our best attempts to transform ourselves by pure, unaided human ability. I actually think this deep moral insight into the conditions required for deep transformation of the self rings true with a great deal of human experience, both firsthand and secondhand. Paul notes that those who have been made alive in Christ have died to the project of self-mastery apart from God's gracious activity. Biblical authors recognize that abiding control over the unruly and sinful passions that wage war against the soul is an ability that is only produced in the self by way of willfully merging with the life-transforming resources of God's empowering Spirit. Self-control is not the product of pure human grit and self-mastery for Paul. It's the product of the life and power of another at work in the depths of the human spirit. What Paul calls, that is self-control, is a fruit of the Spirit. Indeed, as Paul says, those who belong to Christ Jesus, that is, Those who live by the Spirit and no longer rely solely on their own self-mastery and discipline, quote, have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Those who, quote, walk by the Spirit will not gratify the desires of the flesh. The spiritual exercises, according to a Christian philosophical way of life, serve as channels of divine grace that flood the soul with the only power that's capable of sculpting us into the kinds of people we otherwise couldn't be without God's gracious initiative in our lives. There is, I think, a sober realism at the heart of a Christian philosophical way of life regarding the impossibility of deep and lasting human transformation in the power of the self. I think one that rings true, at least with my own experience. We, of course, have our own modern existential ailments that hinder our ability to navigate the world in life-giving ways. These might include our existential disorientation or vertigo as it relates to what is truly real and good in human life, or it might relate to our ailing sight and attention due to the flood of visual noise that inundates every waking moment of our human experience. Might living philosophically as a Christian serve as a potent medicinal remedy for our modern existential ailments? Indeed, I think it can. Might Christian philosophy as a way of life be the only way of life that has the explanatory resources to adequately account for our deep wonder hunger and appetite to make sense of the world, as well as making possible the deep and lasting personal transformation that we so deeply crave? Indeed, I'm inclined to think so. So, coming full circle to our opening question, what might explain philosophy's abysmal public relations problem today? Actually, interestingly enough, it was only after reading ancient philosophy that Marco Rubio later recanted his earlier mark. He said this in 2018, quote, he says, I made fun of philosophy, but then I was actually challenged to study it, so I started reading the Stoics. I've changed my view of philosophy, but not on welders. I love that, by the way. We need both. It's only a politician, right? But not on welders. We need both. He says vocational training for workers and philosophers to make sense of the world, end of quote. But if what is practical and relevant in human life continues to be reduced to what maximizes useful, measurable economic or technological outcomes, then philosophy will remain supremely impractical and utterly useless, even with a return to a more ancient conception of philosophy as a way of life. If, however, something's being practical is understood in terms of helping you achieve the kinds of goals that are ultimately worth seeking in human life, including the satisfaction of your wonder hunger and your natural appetite to make sense of the world as a meaning-seeking animal, then philosophy may well be one of the most practical ways you can live your life. Perhaps Marco Rubio was right in the end. Philosophy remains indispensable to a genuinely full and fulfilling human existence. What do you think? Thank you very much. Absolutely, I'm happy to, yes. Yeah, right here in the front. What's your name?
Evan.
Hey, Evan. Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for speaking.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, I'm curious, you start out by talking about philosophy perhaps eclipsed by the method of STEM, right?
Yeah.
Science, technology, and mathematics. Aren't those methods themselves rooted in a sort of philosophy, that being empiricism? Why is it not the case that we've moved away from the traditional ways of thinking about philosophy, i.e. the ancient ways, in favor of empirical methods by virtue of the utility in those empirical methods themselves? Why isn't it the case that we've moved away from Christian philosophy, but not philosophy as a whole by virtue of that?
Okay, so you made the comment that you think, so correct me if I'm wrong here, so I'm just trying to repeat what you're saying, that you're of the opinion that the STEM disciplines are driven by empiricism?
Yeah.
Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Do you think that that's necessarily the case? Do you think one could reject empiricism as a theory of knowledge and still see the value in the STEM discipline? So my claim here is not that those aren't valuable. By no means am I saying that. What I am saying is that that can tend to eclipse, as you said, the value of other areas of human inquiry that have value, for sure. So I guess I would say,
I think there's
go ahead.
absolutely a realm of study,
Yeah.
or a realm of thought that isn't the subject of empirical questioning, or
Yes.
can't be dealt with empirically, rather.
Yeah.
I do, however, reject the idea that one can embrace what emerges from empirical philosophy, or one could reject empirical philosophy, rather, and then embrace what comes afterwards from empirical philosophy, right, downstream, the downstream effects being engineering, sciences, mathematics. I think the two are inextricably linked, and I struggle to see how one can lay out a framework that gets to the conclusion of the STEM disciplines without that starting point, rather.
Okay, I would be would love to hear that argument. Maybe we can talk after, because certainly, I mean, you think of some of those responsible for the rise of what we call modern science. I don't think we're empiricists, in the sense maybe we're using that term slightly differently, but maybe we're not.
We've operationalized it differently.
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk after.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah, but good point. I'm curious to hear your thoughts more on that. Yeah, thank you, Evan. Yes, right here. What was your name?
Oh, Hunter.
Hey, Hunter.
Thanks for speaking. I suppose
Yeah.
I want to give you a practical question. What exercises can I do to make myself curious about things I'm not by nature curious about? That is a gift that academics have, and I would like that gift.
Okay, so what exercises, right, might help you become more curious? Do you have any, like, let's just be real concrete here. What are some examples of some areas that you're like, I just have zero curiosity or interest in this particular field, but I'd like to?
Math and language, for sure.
Math and the languages?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. That's a great question. That's a very practical question. Yeah. What are you studying now? I'm curious.
I'm an econ and philosophy major.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I'm really, well, I guess you have, I think the first thing is to have that second order desire. You want to have a curiosity towards these subjects.
Yeah, it's more so just wanting to have a breadth of knowledge to kind of,
Yeah.
I guess, appreciate everything from a variety of angles.
Yeah. Well, I guess that would be an appreciation, right? Would be one type of attitude or posture towards mathematics and languages. But I mean, I don't know which languages in particular. I'm curious. Are we talking biblical languages? Are we talking classical languages?
Well, I mean, for an example, when I took Spanish as a freshman, I kind
Okay.
of regret not paying attention enough. I didn't feel the natural enthusiasm
Yeah.
for it as I do for, say, philosophy.
Yeah.
So I would like to have had that natural enthusiasm so I can retain more. But referring to particular languages,
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to try and read a little Latin. I think that would be really cool.
Okay, yeah, cool. So I was going to use the Latin as an example. So if say you have an interest in, I'll just try to make it close to home for me, an interest in theology. Maybe there's a period in the development of doctrine, say the Reformed Orthodoxy or the Protestant Scholastics, where most of their work is untranslated. I mean, it's being translated, but most of it's sort of, unless you know the language, you can't interact with these sources, right? Unless someone's translating it, right? And the more you bump into the gap between, I need to be working with these sources. I mean, there's so much here that's incredibly rich. And actually, so the primary interest and curiosity is in that area. But once you start reading and people are citing, if you see this major treatise that this person wrote on divine simplicity or something like that, sure enough, unless you know Latin, you can't read it. It's inaccessible to you. I think there are few motivators, maybe others can speak into this too, that are as strong and powerful as those types of considerations, or it could be even the biblical languages as well, that push you towards the study of the languages, because you can't do certain things unless you have some facility in the languages. I know that's helped me immensely. It's pushed me towards languages where maybe I wouldn't otherwise have spent time with, because I can't do certain things I really want to do unless I learn the languages. Now, I don't want to purely instrumentalize learning the languages to just simply, it's useful for the sake of something else, right? I think there can be a kind of beauty to learning the languages. And so that would be all that comes immediately to mind. It's a poor answer to your question, but
Well,
yeah.
I certainly appreciate it. I mean,
Yeah.
trying to get back to God, it serves a greater purpose. So, no, I really like your answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Suggest something?
Yes.
Become friends with someone who really likes that subject.
Mm.
and asks about it.
That's fantastic advice. Fantastic advice. Yes,
So if I might speak, I'm not sure. I'm a
Please.
professor of modern languages, and I'm a linguist, and
Wonderful.
when you get a teacher who opens your eyes to how grammar and language is constructed, it's like the first time I went deep sea diving and saw underwater, it fills you with wonder. Language is constructed in such a wonderful way, and we're so many things about language that we don't understand, so perhaps a class in linguistics may kind of satisfy that scientific part of you that you like, and also introduce you to the wonder of how language works.
wonderful. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for coming to my assistance on that. Yes, in the back, what was your name? Roland? Pleasure to meet you, Roland. Hey.
Pleasure to meet you too. Out of curiosity, would you say that this, I would say, hyper-materialistic, highly individualistic method of analysis in terms of success that we have in the modern world, as encapsulated by Marco Rubio's initial quote, as
Yeah.
purporting the further utility of dwellers versus philosophers,
Yeah.
would you say that this worldview has had deleterious effects on modern society?
Absolutely. I think without question. When, oh, go ahead, yeah. Yeah.
Do you believe that things will always be this way, or do you think in the future humans will inevitably need to change their view of philosophy altogether?
Yeah. Gosh, one can only hope, honestly. But no, I do think when your only value metric is productivity in the very thin economic pragmatic sense, you're going to lose certain humanizing spaces in life. You're going to lose literature, poetry, the arts. You're going to lose philosophy because what do they have to show for themselves? Of what value could they possibly have? And you know, this isn't hypothetical. I mean, there are departments that friends that I know very well who are losing their tenured professors, who are being dismissed because they're in the classics or they're in the philosophy department, and there's just simply according to the standard value metrics, their discipline doesn't show up. It doesn't even show up on the chart, so to speak. So I think if you miss, and that's why I tried to tie in philosophy just with our being meaning-seeking animals, this idea that you're going to lose something vital about human nature when you instrumentalize every aspect of human society, or you dehumanize every aspect of society by simply treating as a means to some other pragmatic or economic end. You're going to lose those uniquely human spaces. And I think we see that happening increasingly. So that is a worry. It's not a new worry, but I do think that I think when we talk about, I teach in a seminary, so I have plenty of students who ask me, how in the world can philosophy be practical, right? Where we always start on that question is, you gotta examine your background assumptions about what is it for an activity to be practical, right? There are philosophical assumptions that are shot through our particular assumptions about what activities are practical versus impractical, assumptions about what we are as humans, assumptions about value, intrinsic and instrumental value, that need to be evaluated and tested and investigated and scrutinized, honestly. So this is just sort of my small attempt to say, hey, remember that you're human, and remember that there are some areas of inquiry that are deeply human areas of inquiry. This isn't to say that other areas of inquiry, like we don't need to wait, not at all, absolutely not. But this is basically to sort of resist the tide of eclipsing those certain humanizing disciplines like the arts, literature, poetry, philosophy. I think we're all kind of in this together. It's not just philosophy, but
Someone who
yep.
actually majors in history, I think that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great. Yes, in front, please.
I have a lot of thoughts.
Perfect.
Certainly I teach biology at Longest, but I also have degrees in seminary, and for those of you guys, I graduated from here.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting.
Great.
But I want to ask you a question before I make any kind of comment. And that is, looking through this, and you're coming back around to Christian philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what I'm hearing kind of underneath the surface is talking about spirituality.
Yeah.
As part of the most, human part where we're grappling with
Yeah.
this, and philosophy is laying that out. Perhaps you could say academically. Is that part of what you're proposing here? Kind of a renewal spiritual?
Yeah, I mean, yes, because actually, at least my own read of philosophy and antiquity, we tend to have a very sequestered, sort of hermetically sealed off view of disciplines today that just wasn't frequently shared or at all in sort of ancient medieval contexts is where I like to kind of hang out. These kind of pursuits tend to be braided together like a sort of seamless cord at times. And spirituality is a very broad category, but you even find spirituality and philosophy joined at the hip, and even like Stoicism. So absolutely, I mean, in these older periods, they were not seen as, well, that's just only what the divinity school is doing. Really, I mean...
Which is more what we do today.
Yeah.
And so my follow-up to that kind of is that in talking about this, and many of the questions you raised really focus on the academics, all right? And that's fine. You and I, we're great. We can do the academics.
Yeah.
And many of you can too in certain areas. But I think also what I kind of hear you talking about too is doing the academics is kind of like the ancient philosophers, right? It's not Christian-oriented in terms of the God piece that would be in there, which I would say in their context would be spirituality. So part of what we might need to do for everyone, so to speak, to begin to entertain philosophy is get away from the purely academics, right? And look at it more in terms of our relationship with God, God's relationship with us, and how do we talk about that?
Yeah.
Many of you know the philosophers she's talking about, maybe you don't. Is that necessary for you to talk about your philosophy of life and how you're living that out spiritually? Because we are always going to have some people who are not gifted like we are intellectually, right? Do they not get to do philosophy?
Yeah.
And that's what I think the Welver comment is,
Yeah.
right? And I would say the Welver does do some philosophy. He just
Yeah.
doesn't talk about it from Aristotle,
That's right.
right? So
Yep.
I think maybe we need to broaden how we're looking at what we're calling philosophy,
Yep.
which you and I do because we're academics.
No, I really appreciate that, and I received that comment. And I do, so in the book, I try to underscore the fact that what you find about philosophia in antiquity is very much, it's much more of a working class view of philosophy. In fact, Plutarch has this great quote about Socrates, and he says, we often think about philosophers as, standing on a chair and giving discourses and learned discourses and lectures. But he actually talks about Socrates doing philosophy while he's joking with his friends. And actually, the supreme act of philosophy in Socrates' life was his drinking hemlock. And that's kind of the target of what I'm after here is decentering, but not, I don't want to, as an academic myself, I don't want to denigrate philosophy in academic context, but I kind of want to de-center that because I think our view of philosophy can tend to be just curricular in the sense that I took my philosophy class, check. It's in the rearview mirror, thank God, that was the most boring class I took, and I don't ever have to do philosophy or think philosophically or engage philosophically ever again. And I just think that's a very naive view. I mean, we are all guided by some vision of reality in the good life. Even the welder. They're all seeking something, and they're ordering their lives accordingly to lay hold of the good that they perceive. You're living philosophically. It's just what's the vision of reality in the good life that you have and that you're seeking. So I actually agree, and I think that more blue-collar, working-class view of philosophy is there, actually, in antiquity.
They just don't recognize what the verbiage we use.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I want to say, because you keep talking about how we teach our classes. So I would say, I took my philosophy here and I loved it.
Great. Wonderful.
But anyway, and part of the thing is how we teach, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to use only examples that our students can't relate to, we're not showing them philosophy in their lives.
Yeah.
And that can be changed. I mean, we have professors at Longwood, I know, who do this.
Yeah.
I'm in a reading group with them, which is a big challenge. But, so it's possible to do that. And so I think those of us who are in undergrad education, they're teaching philosophy, if that's what you folks are experiencing, you might want to knock on your professor a little bit and say, hey, can you make this relevant?
Yeah.
Because we can. We just don't always do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And
Like the tediousness of that. Just don't show up every
oh man, yeah, it's a whole spiritual exercise, teaching in general, isn't it? Can I just add, and then Pete, I want to go to you, but can I just add? So I think it's important. I think it's important to recognize that philosophizing or living philosophically is a degreed notion. So, so both novice and veteran can be both living philosophically, but maybe not to the same degree. So, and the example I use in the book is striving for bodily health, right? That's a degreed notion, right? Think of someone who, maybe it's January 2nd. They've made some New Year's resolutions, and they're saying, I'm gonna hit the gym. I've resolved to eat better, be healthy, and there they are, January 2nd, right? They have begun to structure and order their lives around the good of bodily health, right? But then take the fitness guru or the bodybuilder, I don't know, for the example, right? Who every meal, they're spending multiple sessions in the gym each day. They're living with the good of bodily health in mind. They're ordering their lives around that good, but to a much different degree than the novice, someone who's just started. So I definitely want to allow for not just the professors to be doing philosophy, but anybody who is living in an examined life to a very minimal degree, I think, could be said to be living, and not just living an examined life. They've begun to order their life around some vision of reality in the good life, and they've begun to structure their life around that. So I think that's consistent with the novice and the veteran.
But I think you also at least imply, if not say outright, that the Christian piece is important, because without it, there's an emptiness.
Yeah.
So the bodybuilder who's just building up their body, at some point, they're going to become, discontent? What's the right way to say that? Versus someone who is interacting with God in that. I want to be healthy because God's given me this body, and I want to be able to do those things.
Yeah.
A little bit different twist, and I think you really point that out at the end here.
Yep.
So, ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
I think there are several other people who are looking to ask questions. So.
Please, yes. Pete, can I?
I want to take issue with the way that we frame this, because the exclusion is the welder who understands philosophy very, very well.
Yeah.
What is it that I'm talking about? I can take you into any mechanic shop in Farmville, any machine shop, any welding shop, and I can talk to anybody who's been there a while and ask them to tell me about the nature of every machine in the shop, and they'll tell you right away.
Yeah.
This is such a sweet machine. This one wants to hurt you. They know that.
Yep.
Why is that? Because anybody who's worked in mechanical trades knows that materials put up a natural resistance to change. When you go to drill in a piece of metal, it puts up resistance, and the craftsman has to overcome that resistance in order to transform the materials. But in the process, it is the craftsman who's transformed. We're deep into philosophy, and everybody who works in the trades knows that. If you want to read more, the text is Richard Sennett, The Craftsman.
Great.
And it's a very eloquent addressing of this. I want to give welders a whole lot of credit, and mechanics and everybody else who works here. Philosophy is very much present, more so than what we expect.
Okay.
Where did I spend my career? In the investment business.
Yeah.
From time to time, we would have, to Evan's point, we would have people who had STEM disciplines come to us, and every week we would get a stack of resumes like this, and we'd put them in a pile and not pay much attention to them. In 35 years, I don't ever remember ever getting a resume with a background in philosophy. But if it did,
Interesting.
that would go to the top of the stack, and that person would immediately get an interview. Same way with comparative religion, same way with classics. One of the greatest traders in Wall Street is Louis Bacon. He has a degree in classics from Middlebury University.
Wow.
Why is he so good at this? It's not because of the technical skills that he has. I can teach anybody in this room the technical skill. He understands human nature. That's the basis of the investment business. So it's out there, but it's hidden and it's disguised and it's tangential. I would say to you gentlemen who are thinking about going and getting a degree in business, don't do it. Go get a degree in history. Go get a degree in comparative languages. Go get a degree and it will make you so different, and immediately you will be hired. I'm off my subject.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I think the voice that's been muted regarding philosophy in the workplace isn't, in fact, I know a lot of people want to justify the value of philosophy, because actually when you look at the average annual salary of somebody who's studied philosophy, it's actually quite high. So there's this kind of common trope that philosophers are just eking by. They're maybe like artists or something like that, right? They're going into law, they're going into politics, they're actually doing quite well financially. But I think the voice that tends to get muted, while that's true, and I celebrate that, is I certainly want to emphasize the intrinsic value of philosophizing for its own sake because of what we are as meaning-seeking animals. So I actually 100% agree with you. I just think the volume needs to be turned up on not necessarily that, but on, hey, it's intrinsically valuable for its own sake to feed your deep hunger on truth and goodness and beauty. That's actually deeply fulfilling as what it means to be a human. So I think we can have both of those.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting too, how quickly we get into these questions.
Yeah.
You know, I would meet with an investor, what is he trying to do? The most common answer was, I want to make the most money with the least amount of risk. Oh, you think you can get something for nothing? Let's talk about that. Immediately, you're in the philosophical realm.
Yeah.
So this is out there.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it goes by this name.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Pete.
Please join me in introducing him in a final round of applause.
Oh, thank you so much.